Hey everyone, Jeb here again. In this video, I'm going to talk about 6 tips for how to onboard and train a VA effectively. Let's jump right in. Tip number 1, get started right away. You want to get started within a week for sure. So you hire your worker, be sure to book in a first training call with them right away, the next day, within a few days, etc. The thing you want to keep in mind is that the longer you wait to start with your VA, the less excited they're going to be, right? So they had a call with you, they got hired by you formally, they've been notified by the iWorker team that they were hired by you. If you wait more than a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month to get started with them, their excitement level is going to go way down and they're going to be much less engaged with you from the outside. So it'll be a little bit more work to rekindle that excitement that they had when they first interviewed with you, when they first got hired by you, etc. So start right away, even if it's 5 or 10 hours, even if it's not the whole slate of projects you hope to have them working on, get them working within 7 to 10 days on tasks that even if they're 5 to 10 hours a week, that's a good starting point. Tip number 2, document your process. Okay, I talked about this in the last video. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but the absolute best way to train a worker, the best way to train a VA, particularly at the outset when you don't really know them, they don't know you, is to actually go over the top and documenting the process for their first task, right? So this probably means having several calls with them to talk through the process that you're looking for them to follow with that particular task, your expectations, etc., and then to give them kind of ongoing, friendly, kind feedback as to how they're doing. So once they get to know you and your business, you don't have to be quite as extensive in documenting every process for every task, but at the outset, you definitely do. So that's tip number 2. Tip number 3, establish expectations around updates. This is good to do on a video call when you're onboarding the worker. So the specific question you want to address here is, what kind of updates do you want and expect? For example, if I have someone working for me who's doing 15 plus hours a week, or even if they're doing less than that, but they're doing quite an important task, I will have them send me a daily update with a breakdown of everything they did, broken down by time and how long they spent. And I'll ask them to send it to me either via Slack or via email. So define this with your VA. If you have them 5 hours a week, then probably having them check in daily is a little bit of overkill, but maybe it's once a week, maybe it's twice a week or something like that. But you want this to be crystal clear, and I'd also write it down. So send them an email. So you have this video call, the first few calls with the worker, you're defining initial tasks, projects, expectations, etc. At the end of that, send them an email or write this all down in a Google document and share them on that Google document with what are the expectations that you've agreed upon. So, hey, Diego, just sending you this email to write down what are our expectations or what are my expectations with regards to communication. Since you'll be working with me 15 hours a week, 20 hours a week, whatever it is, please be sure to send me an email daily at the end of your work session, writing down what it is that you worked on, a rough breakdown in terms of time and total amount of time. Here's a sample kind of template that you can use for this kind of daily update, something like that, right? So you're writing it down, you're making it super clear. So that's tip number 3, and making sure that the expectations around updates are super clear from the outset. Okay, tip number 4, figure out what platform to communicate on. In your day-to-day, how are you communicating with your worker? Are you doing it via email, Slack, Skype, Zoom, WhatsApp? Here's our recommendation. We strongly recommend using Slack. Slack is a messaging platform. It's free for almost all use cases, unless you have a very large company. It's a very, very good tool. I imagine many people who are watching this video already use Slack. We do not recommend asking for the worker's personal WhatsApp number, their phone number, etc. The blending between personal and work time is generally not good. You'll generally find that it's not a good way to manage a remote worker. So establish what the communication platform is, and then establish some expectations around that. So for instance, if your communication platform is Slack, let them know that you'll be checking Slack at least once a day or twice a day, or you'll respond to them with this level of frequency, and try to define that frequency with them as well. How responsive are you expecting them to be on that communication platform? So again, if your communication platform is Slack, establish what are your expectations around their frequency or responsiveness? Say, it might be twice a day or 3 times a day, or maybe they're on Slack. If they're working 8 hours a day, maybe they're on Slack all the time and you expect a response within 10 or 15 minutes. Make that super clear so that when you have questions, when they have questions, when you want to assign them tasks, when you want to give them feedback, et cetera, there's a single and clear communication platform on which all of that will be occurring. Tip number 5, invest time in your virtual assistant. What do I mean by this? It's a little bit like that old rule about friendship, which is that the more that you put in, the more you'll get back, right? Or I guess this is just the old rule of investment or smart investment, which is that the more you put in, the more you get back. The exact same is true for working with a virtual assistant. If you put in very little in terms of training, in terms of getting to know them, in terms of giving them feedback, et cetera, you're not going to get the same amount back. So what does this mean concretely? So be prepared to spend time on calls with your virtual assistant, particularly at the outset, particularly as you're onboarding them, particularly as you're getting them comfortable with your company. You're talking about what kinds of tasks and projects they'll be working on. They're starting to do that initial work for you. You're giving them feedback. You're doing quality control. You're doing training, et cetera. Be prepared to spend time on calls with your virtual assistant, answering their questions and working with them. So if I'll give you an example here. If you're going to have an initial call with your virtual assistant, right? So you've hired your virtual assistant, you're going to have an initial call. At the end of that call, schedule in a second call, right? So call number 1 is done. Hey, great. We've talked about this first task. Why don't you get started on it here for the next 24, 48 hours? Do a couple hours today, a couple hours tomorrow. And then the next day, let's have a call and I'll see how you're doing. We can review. I'll give you some feedback. You can ask me questions, et cetera. So investing more time in your virtual assistant will ultimately pay off big time. Tip number 6 is use screencastify and Loom. Only do this once you've invested time in your virtual assistant. They're starting to hit their stride. You're starting to feel comfortable with them, et cetera. But there's a point where you don't have to get on a call with your virtual assistant every time you want a task done, right? There's a software, there's various pieces of software, again, Screencastify and Loom, which I just mentioned, which I'll also mention in a future video, so I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But Screencastify is actually the software that I'm using right now to record this video. And what these softwares allow you to do, they're both free, for most use cases, is they allow you to record videos. So you can do videos like this where you're recording yourself, or you can do videos where you're recording your screen, which are much more useful. So they're browser extensions. You can just Google them. So these days when I'm delegating something to someone on my team who's an established member of my team, I'll often just document the process or the task in a video or a series of videos, send those videos over to them via Slack, ask them if they have any questions, and then ask them if they can get it done by a particular date. So this becomes a very efficient way to assign tasks to a VA. If you have a project that's more complex, of course, you want to delegate all of your social media, your customer service, your lead generation. That's not something you're going to be able to do by sending them a video. So that'll involve really documenting your process again. But for me, in the day-to-day, I send a lot of short videos to people on my team, remote folks on my team, asking them to look into this, handle that, manage this, et cetera. And I just document quickly what I'm looking for in a video. I send it over to them on Slack, and I trust them, and they know me well enough and what I'm looking for that in many cases they'll just do it exactly right on the first time. And it's a very efficient way to communicate what are the kinds of tasks and projects I need done in a short and effective way without jumping on a call each time. Tip number 7, when giving feedback, use the golden rule. So we all know the golden rule from grade school: do unto others as you would want to have, or you would feel comfortable or want to have done to you, right? The concept is the same with feedback. Only give the kind of feedback that you would feel okay receiving from a boss that you had. So if you're a hard ass, if you're cutting or dismissive or rude or disrespectful, you're going to find that your worker's not going to be very committed to you, and you're going to find that they're going to disengage and not give you that kind of dedication that you fundamentally want when you're hiring anyone, when you're onboarding a virtual assistant, when you're working with a team. So instead, what you want to do is you want to be really respectful in your feedback. That does not mean you can't give pointed feedback. So I want to make that extremely clear, but it does mean that you do it in a way that's respectful to them. So I'll give you an example. You know, hey Diego, I know how hard you worked on this project. I can tell. I really appreciate the hours you put in. There was a misunderstanding here with regards to the focus of the project, or the aesthetic that I was going for, or the timeline. Let's talk about that. I want to make sure we can get back on track here. I know what you're capable of. We hired you because you're the best, right? And so you've gone off course here with this last project. I wasn't as happy to see that you had missed the deadline or that you hadn't communicated with me, or I was surprised to see that you had missed the deadline on this, or that you weren't as communicative as I'm used to with you. So let's have a call. I want to talk about how to get you back on track because I know what you're capable of here, right? So that kind of feedback is starting a conversation. It's pointed and direct, but it's not disempowering. It's saying, hey, I hired you because you're the best, which presumably is the case, right? I hired you to my team because you're the best. I think you're the best, but you've gone off track here. So let's talk about that. Let's reestablish what the expectations are. Let's figure out what might have happened in this case, because I know what you're capable of, right? So that fundamental concept of giving feedback in a respectful way, but in a respectful way that's also pointed, is very powerful.